Thanks for joining, everybody. Excited to have another multi-chain session. We're bringing back a team that I think we did. You guys might have been the first one, or maybe second that we did, probably like 6 months ago. We're bringing back the team at Axillar. So today we've got Sergey, who is the CEO over at Axillar, and so yeah, excited to bring him on. You guys continue to do a ton of really cool stuff in the space, and I think I think the product building you guys have been doing over the past 6 months has been significant, and so glad to have you back here, Sergey.
Hey everyone, yeah, great to be here. Thanks so much again for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for anybody kind of new to the space, new to the scene, new to Moonbeam, new to Axelar, love to always give teams kind of the ability to kind of give quick overview of kind of what you guys are up to, who you are, where you come from, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, no, sounds good for sure. I mean, high level, quickly for those of you that don't know me, my background kind of technical, distributed systems, cryptography, worked on various protocols over the years, helped to build out the Algorand platform and take it to the market. Prior to that, did PhD at MIT doing a lot of protocol work. Um, After launching Algorand, I think we kind of kept on seeing the problem that was rising at that time for the ecosystem, which is the problem of secure cross-chain communication, right? And that's what kind of realized would be one of the most important problems to solve for the ecosystem in general. That's going to propel us to mass adoption, right? And that's what we've been focusing on at Axillar, which is really building secure cross-chain infrastructure to deliver interoperability and connectivity across different blockchains. I've been working on this for just under a couple of years. We have an amazing team with deep roots in cryptography, consensus mechanism, distributed systems, kind of raise capital, from great backers in the space, and yeah, continuing to build and really get to a point where we can connect everybody across different blockchain ecosystems.
Nice. Yeah, I remember when I think we definitely had crossed paths in the Algorand days, but I remember when we got reconnected, it was like November 2020, maybe, when you guys had just started to. I think you just closed your first round of funding, and I remember a lot of the ideas that you guys were talking about were still super early, but I think over the past the past couple of years, you've seen a lot of I think the ideas and thoughts that you guys had put in really come to the forefront. And I know there was a Masari report. I forget when it was last week, but really highlighting a lot about what you guys are up to, and building the category, which I think you guys are kind of helping lead that pack, because when folks have traditionally looked at bridging, it's just been assets, and it's lock one on one side, unlock it on the other. But there's a lot more that can kind of go into it, and we can kind of go in a little bit more on the tech side in a couple minutes. But so in terms of where you guys are today, what you're connected to, what networks you're connected to, obviously you're connected with Moonbeam. That's why we're here. But how did you think about ecosystems that you wanted to connect, and where you kind of saw maybe investing in newer ecosystems versus some of the more established traditional ones? How did you think about your expansion strategy?
Yeah, so to date we launched it already on over dozens of different chains, right? Like everything from Moonbeam, like Ethereum, right, to Avalanche, kind of some Cosmos chains like Osmosis, Cosmos Hub, and so on and so forth. And I think for us, what we really saw when we were picking like initial, go to market connections, or what are the ecosystems that we think there's going to be interested in, where do we see developers go, where do we see developers build, right, and why do they make those choices? At the very core of it, for us, the goal has been really to empower developers to build on the best platform for their needs, right? Like, why did we even end up in this situation of cross-chain or multi-chain? Is because traditional blockchain platforms like Ethereum provided really not an ideal kind of long-term sustainability path, right, for a lot of these applications, where once you launch it, once you find some product market fit, you have great liquidity, but then if users have to pay $100, $50 for a transaction and wait for minutes for it to be confirmed, that's not really long-term sustainable to bring millions of users into the ecosystem. And so we saw this trend where these newer platforms like Moonbeam, right, where it is very easy for developers to go to and build EVM compatible contracts and reuse a lot of their code base, but then have those properties like fast finality, right? Cheap gas costs, kind of great interoperability and connectivity throughout the ecosystem is really what they try to optimize for in the longer run. And that's how we ended up working with Moonbeam, like Avalanche. Ethereum is still connected because I think a lot of activity is flowing from it, which is interesting to see. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks for the shout out there. I mean, I think you'll anybody listening, you'll start to see some of our new messaging that we've been really working on is really focused on this interoperability message because in building Moonbeam, I think when we started in 2019, we always believed that we were heading into a multi-chain future. I think we've been right about that. But in terms of where we felt the market would continue to kind of go is making interoperability from the start is a lot is not easy to do, but I think long term it kind of future proofs you versus trying to add interoperability after the fact. So on Moonbeam, we obviously have XCM internally to Polkadot, but then working with folks like Axillar really do help us kind of expand the ecosystem externally and get some pretty cool use cases kind of nailed down. So one thing I've never asked you actually, Sergey. So how did you guys decide to use the Cosmos SDK?
Yeah, I mean, at the time when we're starting and looking at the problem, we kind of understood that we're going to need to um, kind of build a consensus, right? Build a robust and decentralized consensus to process, cross-chain messages and deliver these kind of security properties that we wanted to. And we needed kind of to work with a stack that would allow us to make those customizations at the consensus layer, from the ground up. And I think like Cosmos SDK and Tendermint were, kind of ahead of other projects at that time in their customization properties. I played with the stack a little bit, just made sure it would actually work for our needs, and then we kind of went with it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I mean, we always, especially now today, when we talk about, why did we build on Polkadot? We always felt like there were really two ecosystems to look at. If you were looking at building your own chain, it was really Cosmos and Polkadot. And I still think that they haven't either really necessarily had like their time in the sun quite yet, which is exciting for us because I think it has been a long time of building. I think both ecosystems are very well aligned in terms of it's just really it's organic builders that believe in kind of this multi-chain system of interoperable blockchains or specialized blockchains that are kind of building. And so obviously with the Axelar team, we've now we're working on getting the Cosmos and Polkadot ecosystems connected, which is super exciting because I think there are a ton of synergies there. So, all right. So we briefly touched on it when we kind of kicked it off, and I said we kind of go back to some of the tech pieces. But in terms of like what makes Axillar unique, obviously, as I mentioned, you guys do a lot more than traditional bridging. When folks think about just moving one asset to another chain and kind of a lock and mint model. What makes you guys special? What are some of the things that you guys trying to talk to teams about when you're talking about building with Axillar?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, on the high level, what makes it unique is that Axelar is the only solution out there in the market that provides robust proof of stake security for cross-chain activity, right? Like everything else that you see in the market, at least right now, is kind of orchestrated through like a bunch of permissioned multi-sigs that are authorizing requests cross chains, and they have like different names and like they have different like models, but at the very core of it, they're all like centralized around a very small subset of validators or parties that will be relaying these cross-chain transactions. And so Axillar being built around the Cosmos SDK and the proof of stake consensus allows us to have strong proof of stake security model which is similar to the chains that we actually connect, right? Like Moonbeam, like Avalanche, like Phantom, and so on and so forth. So very strong security. You have very strong liveness and safety properties associated with it. Then the second point is what we're really doing is really pioneering, I think, what we defined like a couple of years ago in our white paper, which is what it means to be interoperable and communicate cross-chain, right? And that goes way beyond asset transfers, and that really kind of the model that we like to think about it is almost like being able to perform kind of Turing complete computations cross-chain, right? And what I mean is that being able to call a contract on a different chain, being able to transfer, NFT, perform a query across different blockchains, and so on and so forth. Those are all very rich functionalities that need to be, supported by the underlying kind of interoperability of cross-chain protocols. And kind of how the applications interact with it is, very important alongside with it. So we're not just kind of a bridge that allows you to move tokens back and forth. We actually deliver these secure general message passing calls that you can make to kind of take your program, right, and move it around different blockchains, manipulate assets on different chains, synchronize state, perform cross-chain calls, NFT transfers, and so on and so forth. So that really opens up this whole array of use cases where we can go beyond bridges and token transfers and really talk about composability of applications across all of these different environments. So that's the second point. And I think a third point, which is really important to us, is simplifying user experiences for the whole ecosystem, right? Right now, interaction across blockchains is just a nightmare, and I think everybody's fed up with it, right? Like you have to use multiple like bridging, protocols. You have to have multiple wallets. You hop back and forth, and so on and so forth. It's by nowhere near close to what an interaction with Web2 applications is, right? Where we can interact with an application on a global scale from anywhere we are, as long as we have connectivity, and we have to get to the same model in the blockchain ecosystem where if an application is hosted on a given chain, users can interact with it no matter where they are without having a lot of friction or any friction in this process. So that's really what we're trying to optimize for, is what I call as like delivering one-click user experiences and kind of building the stack and building the services around it to facilitate that.
Yeah, absolutely. In working with your co-founder Yorgos, I mean, I was kind of, my mind was starting to get blown when he was kind of talking through what the what the SDK would be able to kind of power in terms of it's essentially in the back end what it's doing is it's just facilitating these transactions without the end user having to know kind of really what's going on. They just understand, well, I'm able to do A to B because, well, I don't really need to know all of the steps here. I know Axillar has created this SDK that's secure and has enabled me to kind of move whatever I need to or make this transaction kind of happen, which is super interesting. Last week you and I were on a panel at Polka Dot Decoded. Encourage anybody to go check that out. There were a couple different teams there, but one was Prime, and Colton had mentioned that you guys are working pretty closely with the Prime team. I do think, like, do you mind going through their example at least about how they kind of plan to use it? I think it's a good, or another example. It's up to you if you have another one you'd like to talk about. But I do think it is good to kind of showcase at least like just how a team is thinking about utilizing this kind of message passing, because it gets more, I don't know, real when you can kind of talk about a real use case of somebody that's building.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I think in particular, Prime, I'm super excited, right, about what the guys are doing. I think like they're pioneering, some of these cross-chain native applications, what I call, right? On the high level, what they're trying to do is create, a cross-chain, a brokerage system, right, where, you can have, different assets on different chains that would kind of interact with the specific kind of smart contracts on that are hosted on Moonbeam and kind of send messages back and forth in order, to increase capital efficiency across all kinds of financial instruments, right? So you can take your asset, you can kind of send a message on a given chain, you can take a loan against it, and so on and so forth, right? Like various functionalities. So I think what's exciting to me about what they're doing is like actually like the architecture and how they're approaching it, right? Where they have kind of a pick the home base chain, which is Moonbeam for their instantiation. That's where most of the logic of their contract lives for the actual system, and they have kind of satellite contracts on various other chains, and those satellite contracts, their job is to receive assets or receive messages from the users on the chains where the users have their wallets, and then perform cross-chain calls to Moonbeam in this case to execute and authorize those transactions, right? So as an example, if you want to borrow against your asset and use it as a collateral, and your asset by default is on Ethereum or on Avalanche, you send that message. That message is then relayed to the satellite contract. The satellite contract will then send the message to the kind of home base chain, authorize it, and then the user can take a loan against it, right? And then the loan could actually end up being, on the same chain or a different chain, and you can instantiate it in various ways. So what does it allow you to do? It allows them to really have global liquidity, right, and access to all the assets in the whole ecosystem. So that's number one. Kind of a prime before this, if they were built on a single chain, they would always be kind of stuck in a world of liquidity and users having to bridge the asset manually and kind of keep on increasing it in various shapes and forms. And so that's not ideal. So by having global liquidity and access to it through their instantiation, I think allows them to go to all the users and all the markets. And second of all, the second point, like I mentioned, is like simplifying user experiences, right? Where you can have your asset, you can take a loan, against it by executing a single transaction on one chain, and that's it, right? Not having to bridge, not having to move your assets back and forth, and so really accessing, kind of cross-chain native functionality of interconnected ecosystems.
Yeah, it's pretty novel to kind of think about, because I think that when it comes to the bridging of the assets over the past 2 years, that I think has become really prevalent. It's the success criteria, I think, that a lot of chains are judged by is kind of the TVL that they have managed to kind of acquire and get on chain, which I think in some ways is kind of a vanity metric. But in this kind of use case, it doesn't really, like, the TVL doesn't move. It just kind of gets locked on the chain that someone's interacting with it, and the brains of it just kind of move things around on the ledger on Moonbeam, and so you're able to kind of lock and unlock liquidity on different chains as needed, but not having to like aggregate all that TVL back to one place is pretty interesting. I think it's pretty cool. So thanks for taking everybody through that. I do think it's valuable, just giving like a use case that somebody's working on, because I think it makes it a little more tangible for listeners to kind of understand. So in terms of we can go a little bit broader in terms of like state of crypto today. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, it's been a wild couple months, but like, where do you see some of the trends going? Obviously, we think that general message passing, I think, is probably the biggest trend that I'm seeing. But what are some of the things that you might be keeping an eye on or looking at over the past couple months?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's been a wild couple of months, right? I think everybody in the ecosystem kind of understands that. I mean, I think overall, kind of it's probably a healthy time for the ecosystem to kind of take a step back and kind of understand like what went wrong and what went right during the last cycle, and what do we need to improve, to kind of to prepare for broader mass adoption of the blockchain technology. And I think to me, kind of the trends that I saw in the last bull run, I think like in some sense, at least DeFi and like NFTs kind of have found product market fits in some sense, right? Not all applications, maybe have not, but as a categories, they're clearly categories that have users and have the traction, and will continue doing so, despite the markets, just because they allow kind of this frictionless access to the assets and interaction with them that is not available in the traditional kind of finance system. So I think that's point number one. And I think point number two, when you have a lot of activities and when you have a lot of interactions with these applications, we saw all kinds of issues from the infrastructure layers, right? So everything from Ethereum having a crazy gas prices, like $200-$300 for a transaction was just insane. RPC issues across the industry, and so on and so forth. Same thing when it comes to, I think, kind of cross-chain interoperability. I think we saw a lot of ad hoc solutions and like bridging protocols kind of being attacked or being compromised. I think over $1 billion has been lost. So that infrastructure is just is not there at all, right? And kind of the analogy that I like to make is that we're almost like in in 2000 and 1 and 2002 of web adoption, right, and applications around that, while infrastructure is still like in the 80s and early 90s maybe, right? So I think that's really the gap, and I think as we get into this new cycle where we can actually sit back and actually understand how to fix this infrastructure pieces, how do we make robust cross-chain communication, how do we um, make sure our platform scale remain decentralized, remain robust, you don't have RPC issues or blowing up gas costs as soon as we find a couple of applications that are finding traction. So I think this is like an opportunity for all the builders to revisit that, make sure we have a better infrastructure, I think, and better user experiences, right, as I mentioned, as we get into the next wave.
Yeah, I think I agree with all that. It's kind of funny to look back at some of the the past run ups and then bull to bear and kind of what's come out of it. I mean, I think this past bull was really so focused on I think some of the projects that came out of 2017, 2018, which was Algorand, Avax, Solana. I think that we're kind of building new and kind of innovative solutions and for a variety of reasons it moved quickly up and it's obviously moved quickly down and had some other pieces that have kind of fallen along the way as well, but it is it's very cliche sometimes to say like this is the kind of time for building, but when you look at the projects that kind of come out of these cycles and what the trends look like, I do tend to agree with you that this is the time for builders to create some cool things and be ready for kind of the next catalyst that gets crypto kind of back on the scene again. I would agree that,
Yeah.
and something you guys are specifically focusing on is on multiple fronts, but the user friction piece I think is still huge, and I know you're working with a couple different wallet providers to be able to facilitate things like the cross chain swaps without them having to necessarily know that they're going cross chain. It's I want asset A and I want or I have asset A, I want asset B. A user shouldn't have to go figure out, okay, well, how do I bridge it? How do I move it? It should be able to click like, just do it for me. And so I do agree that like the user friction is something that needs to come down significantly. But with some of the new wallet infrastructure out there, I'm excited to kind of see where that goes. And like you said, the bridging and asset transfer and general message passing protocol, I think, is going to be the next big wave here. So I'm excited to see where that goes over the next couple of years here. So, what's up for you guys for the next like 6 months or so? Are there networks? You've got big announcements that are coming. Are there networks that you're targeting? Anything that you can kind of talk about publicly?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think we're continuing to kind of scale across, two dimensions. One, on the back end of the transport layer, just connecting more ecosystems. So, I think we're already live, with kind of a 12 or 13 different ecosystems, different blockchains. We kind of processed over a billion in cross-chain volume by connecting more chains, allowing them to interact with one another is super important to us, and we're going to continue doing that. And the second thing is we are early in this phase of building these cross-chain native applications with many developers, including Prime, and that's what we're going to continue focusing on. Right, is figuring out like what are the tools they need, what is the infrastructure they actually need to make their developer experience as simple as possible, and allowing to enable these types of experiences. So for us, I think a lot of the focus is going to be on education, education of developers, education of retail, subsequently, and working alongside with many of the builders to help them kind of a design in this new paradigm.
Gotcha. No, exciting. And so I'll throw you a bit of a curveball. I was on a panel. I got substituted in for Rob Abermeyer, which is a whole nother discussion from Parity. But it was at Consensus, and I got subbed in with it was with Sandeep from Polygon and Billy from Cosmos, and actually Galen from your team hosted it. And one of the questions was, like how many chains, period, was kind of what Galen kind of framed it up as, which was, if we're heading into this multi-chain future, how many chains do you see? Is it 100? Is it 1,000? Is it 10,000? Is it more than that? I mean, what's your? I thought it was an interesting question to kind of think about. And obviously, you guys are building your own chain. We have as well, and Cosmos and Polkadot are all about building chains. So I figured I'd throw that at you.
Yeah, great question. I actually asked this question in a panel in Avalanche Summit. I was moderating a panel, so it's not such a curveball question to me.
All right, fair. So Galen ripped you off. Okay, all right, I got it.
We're a team, so it's cool. But
fair enough.
high level, yeah, my thinking, probably, hundreds of thousands at least, right? And I think I have technical reasons to kind of claim that, and primarily because of the following. If you look at kind of Web 2, it doesn't run on a single database. It doesn't run on a single network. There is no single database or single network that can scale to support Web 2 demand and Web 2 applications, right? Every time you're interacting with a website, it sends like millions of queries on the back end. Assuming it's a kind of has good user base, lots of activity is generated, lots of state is generated, lots of data is generated. I think back to blockchains, okay, we have a couple of initial applications that found product market fit. I think many more are going to find it. We're seeing a lot of gaming activity that's picking up, right? We're seeing a lot of interactions between assets and games, which I think is like super exciting as well. So I think many more applications will be finding product market fits over the coming years. It's still incredibly early. And to support that and to facilitate that, at some point, once they find the product market fit, right, on a chain that has liquidity or has like composability, they will need to isolate some of their resources. And to isolate their resources, they will need to potentially like launch, a parachain or whatever, subchain, whatever you want to call it, and have a more fine-grained control over physical resources of their environment, so they can continue providing those seamless user experiences, cheap gas costs, and so on and so forth. So the way that I view it, I think we're going to be in the world with probably on the order of multiple dozens of major ecosystems that have kind of a good activity, good liquidity, good mix of different use cases, where as an application builder you would go and ship your application to find like a product market fit. Once you find product market fit, you're probably going to need to isolate some of your resources. And I think we've seen it with DYDX, I think more recently, right, where they had a product market fit. They were suffering from high gas costs. I think they tried with some roll-up solutions and or Starkware in particular, and then now they're announcing they're gonna transition to their own chain in the Cosmos ecosystem. So I think you're going to continue seeing that trend, and I think that inherently is going to lead to more and more chains and more connectivity across them that will be required.
Nice. I think Billy from Cosmos and myself we're on the same page as you are. Sandeep had a very different view of the world. I think obviously building Polygon and being very Ethereum focused. He just had a very different approach. Hey, it ended up being a really good conversation. It's always good to get different opinions. I think sometimes we, especially on the Polka Dot side or the Moonbeam side, we can sometimes be in our own kind of silo. So always good to get opinion from folks that are building in different ecosystems and whatnot. So cool. Well, look, I generally like to keep these to about 30 minutes. Anything after that, I don't like keeping people too long. So I appreciate you hopping on today, Sergey, and I hope folks learned something new, learned something cool. Feel free to follow both Sergey and I, as well as Moonbeam and Axillar for updates and new stuff coming down the pike as we continue to collaborate and move things forward.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Nate. It was great chatting.
All right.
See you. Bye.
Bye.